Hey guys, how we doing? Um, so I made this recorded video for you, like I talked about, since I'm not going to be there live with you on Monday to talk about this. But more or less, it feels the same as a live session since you guys don't really talk to me all that much anyway. So what we're going to be talking about today, what we're going to be going through is um, the continued story of trade, which has been kind of the theme that we've been going through the entire time. We talked about Islamic contributions and how it's important to recognize that all the things that the Islamic cultures were doing created this desire for trade, and access to information is going to spread throughout the world, and all kinds of great technologies are going to spread throughout the world as a result of that. We talked last time about the Mongols in China. We talked about some of the products that were available over there. We talked about how critical the Mongols were to protecting trade routes and ultimately opening up these lines of communication and this flow of goods and ideas and religion and disease we'll get into next time along these trade routes. So this is really just a continuation of that story, just looking at now a new area. And the area we're going to be looking at today is the African civilizations, So let's kind of jump into it here. As always, I'll put this lecture up on my webpage so that you guys can get access to it in case I'm moving too fast and you guys missed out on something. But I would suggest, as always, that you guys take some notes, jot down some main ideas, at least get kind of a bullet pointed outline of this, so that you can help yourself to remember the information, but use that information should I give you some sort of a quiz and say, go ahead and pull out your bullet pointed list so that you can kind of aid yourself in taking that. All right, so when we talk about Africa, we're going to kind of break it into a couple of different regions. We sort of have to do that. Africa's pretty large, and regionally speaking, it's very diverse. The area off to West Africa is very unique in a lot of ways in terms of its culture and its religion, and even in terms of the resources that are available. So we're going to start by looking at the West African civilization. Then we're going to move over and talk a little bit about what's going on the east side, and then very, very briefly talk about what's going on down at the south part. But West Africa has traditionally been a very isolated area. They weren't very connected to the rest of the world by trade, and part of the reason that Africa, especially on the west side, had been very isolated is because there's this thing called the Sahara Desert in the way. It's very, very difficult to get to the Sahara Desert. It's the largest desert on Earth. It grows every year. And so, it took a while for the connection to eventually happen. We do begin to see, some interaction, as we get into the modern millennia. But the connection to trade and really kind of the establishment of trade is going to come just a little bit later as we talk about this. But let's start by kind of walking through some of the empires that had existed in Africa. There's really two that I need you to know. The first is the Kingdom of Ghana. They're going to pop up in the 700s. So again, this is a review in some ways of things that are coming before what we're going to be starting our high school curriculum with, which really doesn't kick off until like the 14 or 1500s. This is just looking back in time a little bit at sort of setting the stage for the more modern history. But Ghana became a popular or a successful kingdom as a result of the emerging trade. Now, it's going to be nothing like we see later, but we are going to begin to see some trade routes making their way through the Sahara Desert. We see the utilization of these big camel caravans, which made it at least slightly easier to get through this pretty inhospitable piece of property. And Ghana as a kingdom was successful partly as a result of taxing traders. And that's one of the things that just about every major empire kind of has in common with one another. A lot of success is the result of trade, of being a producer of products and then trading with people and taxing them for access to that information, or taxing them for even using the trade routes if you control the trade routes if they're on your land. But let's focus more on what it is that's coming out of Africa. Just the same way we talked about what's coming out of China, with the porcelains and the silks, kind of the traditional stuff, but then we talked about things like gunpowder as well. A lot of great products coming out of that area. Africa is really known for two things. This is one of the most important things that I cover today. What is the trade built on in Africa? And it's built on gold, and it's built on salt. And one of those I'm imagining in your mind probably seems more valuable than the other, but to the people of the time, it would be hard to distinguish which of those two items is actually more valuable. Salt, there is an enormous amount of it found inside the Sahara Desert. The Sahara Desert used to be the floor of an ocean, and eventually, when the waters receded, it left behind huge salt deposits. And there's these big salt mines in the Sahara Desert that you can go to, and you can carve out these big hunks of salt. And they were traded in Ghana, in some of the bigger cities there. They were selling these products to traders who are coming from truly all over the world. So gold, of course, I think is easy to understand, right? Why is gold valuable? It's always been valuable. It's valuable because it's rare, right? It's shiny and pretty and all that great stuff, but it's always been a symbol of wealth, and it's mostly due to its rarity, right? And at this time in history, about 2/3 of all gold in the world is found in a relatively small area in Africa. That's going to be under the control of Ghana and eventually some of the other empires as well. So a lot of gold in this area. That makes them immediately a big player on the trade scene. Salt, why is it important? They don't have refrigerators at this time. So I said it was equally as valuable as gold because it was a preservative. If you've ever had like beef jerky and whatnot, really all that is salted or dried meat. And you'll notice it doesn't have to be refrigerated. It can last a long time. And that's one of the real values of salt, right? You can use it to preserve foods, and it's really going to be super important in the story of, traveling across big expanses of ocean, exploration, going to new parts of the world. You need to have reserves of food on the boat that can last you over the course of months, and salt is critically important to preserving that food, right? It sucks the moisture out of the meat, which is what causes the spoiling of food, and if you suck out all that moisture using salt, you can have basically food that doesn't have to be refrigerated, right? It doesn't have to be kept cold. And that's super, super important to the world. Having access to food is always critically important. So gold and salt, the two big things that made this area super, super important on the trade route. Let me make a quick point about religion, just to kind of tie in something that we talked about before. We talked about Islamic contributions and achievements, and I showed you some maps at the time about the spread of religion. And one of the things that came along the trade routes fairly early on, starting with about 500 or so after zero, is the religion of Islam. So because the European side of the world is really struggling during this time, the Roman Empire's collapsed, things are really going very badly for them. They're entering that Dark Ages period. Most of the emergence of trade, this buying and selling of products, and really any kind of interaction is coming actually out of the Middle East. And so the Middle East being the foundation of the Saudi Arabian Peninsula, being where Islam has its origins in the city of Mecca, they're going to spread their religion along the trade route. So wherever the trade routes go, the religion is going to go. And so we'll see the religion of Islam spreading out to the east and influencing cultures in India and so on. But then we'll certainly see it moving, and more obviously see it moving to the west into Africa. And so northern Africa, western Africa, even today is a very Muslim area, and that goes all the way back to the religion being spread on the trade routes early on in this period of time. Okay, so that's an important thing to recognize. The other thing that's important to recognize is that these Western African empires were incredibly advanced, just like the Islamic empires, and a lot of that actually is a credit to the religion. One of the things that's required in Islam is a close study of the Quran, and the Quran is not translated, which means you have to be able to read and interpret Arabic, and if that's an essential part of your religion, that you read the holy text. If you have religious people, they are absolutely going to have to study the language to be able to understand it, to be able to participate in the religion. So the more religious an area becomes, when it comes to being an Islamic state, the more likely they are going to be educated and literate and have to read. That is a little bit different than Christianity, where Christianity didn't really require that its people were able to read. In fact, it expected that the people would not read the Bible. They had interpreters who would do that for them. The priests in the Catholic Church would ultimately read the Bible and then decipher it for the people. And that was the expectation, that the people actually can't read that holy text. And so you didn't see a real surge in literacy in Europe until much later. But wherever Islam goes, you see a surge in literacy and education because of the requirement to study the Quran and learn Arabic. Okay, so it's an important point to make about West Africa. It's some of the most educated land in the entire world at this time. Some of the greatest libraries in the world, they exist in this part of the world. Moving on to the next area, which is Mali. Mali is really just going to build upon the Empire of Ghana. If you look at my little map there, The last slide, there was a little red outline of what Ghana was. Relatively small area, but certainly very rich in resources. Mali is just going to build upon that. And we credit Mali, the Empire of Mali, as being kind of the foundational, dominant empire, one of the key dominant empires in the world at this time. The very first emperor, Sunjata, is going to take on the title Mansa. Mansa is going to be the word that the Africans use for their emperor, their Caesar. We used the word Khan last time when we were talking about the Mongols. Same thing, a Khan is an emperor, a Mansa is an emperor, and so Mansa Sunjata is our first leader in Mali, and one of the things that is going to happen after him is really this conversion to Islam, and that takes us to the most famous character in the story of the Empire of Mali, and that is Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa, Mansa Emperor Musa's name, so Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa was able to successfully expand the boundaries of the empire to the greatest size under the empire, twice the size of what Ghana had been before. Again, building upon the wealth that is coming in from the outside world through trade. He's the most important character in the story. And the last point that I'll make about Mali here is, so Mansa Musa, I told you, had converted to Islam. He's one of the ones most responsible for really, furthering the spread of Islam into this part of the world. And I don't know how much you remember about, the pillars of Islam, the fundamentals of that particular religion, but one of the 5 major principles of Islam is that if you're able, you're supposed to take what's called a Hajj. And a Hajj is a pilgrimage back to the Holy Land. Go and actually, visit Mecca, the land of Muhammad. It was an important part of their religion. And so Mansa Musa decided to take it upon himself to do his pilgrimage while at the same time kind of marketing the Empire of Mali and all of the products that he had. So Mansa Musa is going to put together one of the largest caravans that we've ever seen, filled with an enormous amount of valuable product, things made out of gold. The historians that write about it just talk about just, an endless caravan of wealth that makes its way out of the capital of Timbuktu and all the way to Mecca, where people started to take notice. Who's this guy? Where did he come from? There was some, again, trade that was happening between the rest of the world and West Africa, but it's really going to change at this moment in history as a result of him completing the Hajj, but more importantly, selling West Africa to the rest of the world. And everyone, again, takes note. Just the same way people went into China and were like, whoa, look at the stuff, Marco Polo, look at the stuff that they got over here. They got gunpowder, they got all this great stuff. Really, really important. Same sort of thing that we see happening here with Mali and Mansa Musa completing his Hajj, really selling, all of the great product that's available in West Africa and encouraging people, hey, come on out, we got some great stuff. And so that's what you can see right here. There's a couple of things to point out on this slide. We've got this little icon here. These are salt mines, and then all these little, what look like little blocks of gold. Those are gold mines. And so you can see West Africa is incredibly wealthy in these areas. It's not the only area that has them. We will see in some of the areas over in Egypt and Ethiopia, there's going to be some, things like gold coming out of those areas as well. But those aren't the primary resources over there. Most of the gold and the salt is coming out of West Africa. And that's, again, one of those things you really have to know. Segue over to the east side real quick and talk about what's going on here. So East African trade is entirely different than West African trade, mostly because you don't have to go through a desert. Right? East African trade is a little bit easier to access because it's accessed along water ports. And so that's one of the things you have to know. A lot of the story does stay the same, though. So we see the spread of Islam along water trade routes here, just the same way that we saw the spread of Islam along the trade routes over land. Most of the rulers of this region, and again, even to this day, along the coast of East Africa, it's a very Muslim area. And again, there's a whole lot of other things that are both going in and coming out of this area. So, what's coming in, again, they're interested in the porcelains and the spices and the gunpowder and the jewels and the cotton that's coming out of India. There's all kinds of great products coming into this part of the world that they don't really have a lot of access to. And the things that are coming out are, again, gold. Certainly that's happening. But there's a lot of other very, important resources that were incredibly sought after in the world, things like ivory, animal skins. I think we have a hard time in today's day and age understanding the value of those things. You talk about the fur traders in the United States and just how critical they were to the success of our country, and you think, who cares about animal furs? Well, at the time, a lot of people do. These sorts of things became very important. They were incredibly valuable to the world. They were sought after, and so things like ivory, rhino horn, leopard skins, things that maybe don't sound really all that important to us today were incredibly important to the world at this time. And then there's other stuff as well. Things like copper is coming out of this area, frankincense. I don't know. There's all kinds of great stuff. Okay. One of the other things that that I should probably introduce here, something that usually is more considered to be a product of Western Africa because of the Atlantic slave trade, with the United States being eventually a part of that, or the British colonies prior to that, or the enslavement of the people down in the Caribbean and whatnot. Really, there was a lot of enslavement going on in Eastern Africa much prior to that. It wasn't really just a story of West African slave trade. And so, we do get a lot of people coming out of the Arabian Peninsula, people coming out of the Persian Empire, pretty much a blanket that entire area off to the Middle East, that came to this area to actually purchase people. And we do see a lot of movement of people as a result of slavery, from this area out into India and China and some of those other areas. So for whatever reason, that part of the story, when it comes to the story of slavery, it doesn't really translate very well to our history in this side of the world, but it's absolutely a part of the story, and it's certainly not the beginning of the story of slavery. Slavery has been happening, going back certainly to ancient times. The conquest of just about any people usually resulted in slavery. In fact, the word slave itself comes from a group of people, the Slavic people, who were an Eastern European people, who were one of the first people to be enslaved by the Romans. So, though slavery we often connect with Africa, slavery is a much bigger story than just the story of Africa, but certainly it's going to be incredibly detrimental to the history of Africa, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But I wanted to bring that up. That is a part of the story of East Africa that we have to introduce at this time. In terms of empires, the only one I need you to know in terms of East Africa is the Empire of Kilwa. Kilwa was an incredibly important coastal trading state. It's pretty much the end of the line when it comes to how far the trade ships would go south. And so any product that was coming out of South Africa had to make its way all the way up to Kilwa in order to trade with the people of the world. And so we have a lot of resources in South Africa that are going to make their way up the trade routes, going to make their way all the way to the town of Kilwa, which means this empire is going to be able to tax people that are coming along those trade routes, and they're going to be able to make themselves wealthier as a result of that. All right. Sofala is really the port city that you would want to know, but really Kilwa is the empire, I guess. We are going to introduce some Europeans here just very quickly, and that's the Portuguese. Portuguese are going to be, the people of Portugal are going to be the first ones to really make some of these trips around Africa and begin to get involved in the trading, the sea trading with the rest of the world. It's a pain in the neck for the Europeans because of where they are geographically, right? They got to go all the way around Africa to be able to trade with the states of East Africa or with India or with China. And really, water travel is best suited for trade, right? It's much easier to move a lot of products over water than it is to move them over land. And so the Europeans had always wanted to do that. And so one of the things that the Portuguese were famous for doing was actually coming around the southern tip of Africa, some of the first people to do that, with some of the ships that they developed at this time, which were actually far superior, naval battleships compared to just about anything that the world had seen at that time. And because Sofala is a coastal city, we see the Portuguese coming in with the big broadside cannon ships and just wreaking havoc on these towns. They couldn't hide. There was nowhere they could go. They're literally built right on the water. So if you pull up with a big boat that's got 50 cannons sticking out the side of it, and you just start raining down cannonballs, that town is going to fall, which is exactly what happened. And we do start to see the Europeans coming in and taking over some of these coastal towns, these port cities. All right, but that's a story we're going to get into a little bit later when we get into the story of European exploration and conquest of the world. The last area to focus on here is the South. I don't have a lot to say about the South because they weren't really connected directly by trade. Again, in order for them to really connect by trade, they had to take their products, they had to, travel them north to one of those Eastern African coastal cities, to be able to trade through. But the one that I want you to recognize is the Empire of Great Zimbabwe. Of course, Zimbabwe still exists as a country today, but Great Zimbabwe is what it's named after. We don't know a ton about these people, but they've left quite a bit of ruins for us, so we have a general understanding through archaeological work of just how advanced and enormous of an empire this was at one time. We know that it sat on some of the most fertile land. We know that it was very well suited to to raising cattle, and we know that it was one of the connection points between itself and places like Sofala, where we see a lot of gold being taken and eventually shipped out through the port at Kilwa. What happened to them? We don't really know. We've dated their existence to about 1450, when for some reason it was abandoned. In history, it's sometimes hard to fill in the blanks as to what happens to some of these civilizations, especially the ones that don't leave much of a written record, which they did not. But we know they eventually disappeared. But they were important in the story of trade because there is a decent amount of gold in South Africa. They did move a lot of gold up to Kilwa and out to the rest of the world. And so even though they weren't directly connected to the water trade routes, they absolutely made themselves wealthy as a result of trade, just the same way that we talk about West Africa. Okay? All right, so that's really all I wanted to cover in terms of the story of Africa and trade. Again, that's our focus, trade. I've pared this down quite a bit. There's a lot more we could absolutely talk about in the story of Africa, but I feel like this is enough that we have to know to be able to understand, again, the power and the influence of trade, what's moving around the world. And, as these connections continue to be developed throughout the course of history, we're going to be able to more effectively communicate with one another, share ideas, share technologies, and the world will start exponentially growing when it comes to things like progress, technology, to the point where we are today. We're interconnected, and as a result of being so interconnected, we have access to information and technology and learnings and understandings, from all around the world. We're pooling together a lot more brains today than we ever have before because we're connected, and the connection is the result of these instances of trade. Okay? All right, so a couple of things. If you haven't, make sure on my webpage, even though I'm not here, I do need you guys to take attendance today, so please make sure that you've done that. And I think that kind of wraps up everything that I wanted to cover. Make sure that you've done that very quick little guided reading and you've finished the Ed puzzle on Genghis Khan. Other than that, I will see you guys on Wednesday. Have a good one.